Looking at the Pacific today, we see a vast difference between the current situation and that which we're accustomed to seeing in the last year, with the roles of the Japanese and the Allies being completely reversed by now. To the surprise of everyone in Tokyo, the last couple of months had seen a long string of defeats by the Japanese forces in the South Pacific. Just last week, the evacuation of Guadalcanal had been successfully completed, with the rescue of all units on the island under the noses of an American enemy that enjoyed ground, naval and aerial superiority. Yet the Guadalcanal campaign had ended in a complete and decisive defeat, with the Empire of Japan draining their resources to the limit just to end up with an elaborate withdrawal operation. The loss of the Buna-Gona area and the defeat at the Kokoda Track had also been a great shock for Japanese commanders in Tokyo, as their position in New Guinea had much more strategic significance than a small island in the Solomons. Thus, as Operation KE was unfolding, the Japanese decided to embark on a new offensive in New Guinea to secure their important position in the Lae-Salamaua area. Welcome to our video on the direct aftermath of the Battle of Buna-Gona and the start of the Battle of Wau. Hey history fans! As you know, the YouTube algorithm precludes us from releasing more than 3 or 4 videos per week. As the more releases, the lower the average views is, which hurts the overall standing of the channel in the search rankings and such. Still, we produce more videos than that and want to give our viewers a chance to watch them. 2 videos per week are now published as YouTube member and Patreon exclusives. For just $5 a month, yes, 1 cup of coffee, you'll get access to almost 20 new videos. Last week we released the first episodes in our series on the Peloponnesian Wars and the Italian Unification Wars. Click the link in the description or pinned comment and you will get exclusive videos, early access to all videos, learn our schedule, get access to our private Discord, watch our behind the scenes videos, and much more. Thank you for watching and your kind support. We wouldn't be able to do what we love without you. As we've been discussing, the major reverses suffered at Guadalcanal and Buna-Gona provoked a huge change in the Japanese strategic thinking for the South Pacific region at the beginning of 1943. Complementing Operation KE, the evacuation of Guadalcanal, General Imamura had decided to strongly reinforce the Japanese presence in New Guinea, envisioning to establish 2 new future landing points, with the 2nd Special Naval Base Unit and a battalion of the 21st Regiment being earmarked to land on Wewak, while the other 2 battalions of the 21st Regiment were to land at Madang and secure a new airfield construction site. Additionally, a road construction unit was sent to occupy Tuluvu in Cape Gloucester, and a force of SNLF Marines was sent to secure a landing site at Finschhafen. By the start of the new year, these places had been successfully occupied, and the construction of the new airfields had been started. Furthermore, Imamura also planned to bring 2 army divisions to reinforce New Guinea, the 20th and 41st Divisions, as well as extra air units once the new airfields had been constructed. Meanwhile, General Adachi was sending considerable reinforcements to Lae, planning to secure the area with the recently arrived 51st Division. Back on January 5th, a Japanese convoy had departed Rabaul for Lae, carrying the Okabe Detachment, a regimental group of the 51st Division under Major General Okabe Toru, which mainly comprised the 3 battalions of the 102nd Regiment of Colonel Maruoka Kohei and the 2nd Battalion of the 14th Artillery Regiment. Escorted by the 5 destroyers of Captain Kitamura Masayuki, the convoy was spotted by American aircraft near Gasmata at 10:35 on January 6th. An immediate airstrike with 16 P-38s would then be launched, although it would only get to claim 9 enemy planes and only 1 possible bomb hit. During the night, however, an attack by an Australian PBY Catalina would manage to sink one of the transports, successfully killing 456 Japanese soldiers and wounding another 85. As the survivors were picked up by the Maikaze, the convoy then continued on to Lae, though another airstrike would manage to severely damage a transport ship during the final approach. At last, the Japanese convoy reached Lae during the afternoon of January 7th, immediately starting the unloading with haste. Despite the 416 enemy sorties that ended up destroying 2 transports, the majority of the Okabe detachment, almost 4,000 men, would successfully land on New Guinean soil. They would then move down the coast to Salamaua, from where the Okabe detachment planned to launch an assault on the town of Wau. In the meantime, the guerrilla Kanga force of Lieutenant Colonel Norman Flay was not going to sit idly by either. After their successful raids on Salamaua back in late June 1942, the Australians had been ordered to lay low and protect the air installations at Wau, with the secondary task of keeping an eye on the Japanese garrison in the Lae-Salamaua area to report on their strength and movements. By late August, however, after reports of Japanese forces approaching Mubo, Flay had decided to scorch the Bulolo Valley and withdraw towards Winnema and Kajeru to hold the important Bulldog Track, which held his line of communication with the New Guinea force at Port Moresby. Furthermore, General Blamey was planning to use this track for an overland drive on Lae after the Kokoda Track and the Buna-Gona area could be secured. Thus, Wau would be abandoned, and the Japanese would capture Mubo with force on August 31st. Weeks then passed, however, and the Australians realised that the enemy was not planning to advance any further. During the next few months, Kanga Force would continue to acquire valuable information and to raid the Japanese presence at Mubo. Reinforced with the 2nd 7th Independent Company of Major Thomas McCadie in late October, Flay would also decide to reoccupy Wau and start a reconstruction program of the Bulolo Valley. A major raid on Mubo was also planned for January 11th, with McCadie leading 180 Australian commandos to seize Vickers Ridge, while Captain Winning and 150 commandos secured Matmat Hill and Observation Hill. From there, under a pouring rain, the Australians launched a series of concerted attacks on Mubo that lasted for 3 days and killed many Japanese soldiers. Then McCadie withdrew back to the saddle, where 350 soldiers from the recently arrived Okabe detachment launched a strong counterattack on January 16th. As the attack pressed on heavily, the Australians began to fall back in a well-controlled movement, so nightfall would find them settled at House Banana. At the same time, knowing that the Japanese had landed a substantial force on Lae and that they might attack Wau, Blamey decided to send the 17th Brigade of Brigadier Murray Motten to take over the defense of Wau and prepare for an overland offensive against the Lae-Salamaua area. Meanwhile, after the January 16th engagement, General Okabe decided to advance on Wau down an old and long disused track, running through difficult country, which was parallel to the Black Cat track. Because of this, the two sides then lost contact, which allowed the Japanese to gain tactical surprise for their attack on Wau. Yet the advance would also be very difficult and take longer than expected, something that left the invaders short on food and that allowed the Australians to bring the bulk of the 2nd 5th and 2nd 6th battalions by January 27th. As Okabe's men negotiated the climb up to Waipali and then the precipitous descent back down into the Bitoi Gorge, Australian patrols roamed the Wau-Mubo area to find the precise axis of the Japanese thrust towards Wau. By January 26th, however, the track that the Japanese were using had been discovered, so Brigadier Motten decided to send the 2nd 6th Battalion, with commandos attached, to destroy all the Japanese forces between the Black Cat and House Copper. But before the Australians could commence their offensive, Okabe's forces finally fell on the Australian positions at Wandumi during the early hours of January 28th, positions that were manned by the A Company of Captain Wilfred Sherlock. As the Japanese attacked with ferocity, Sherlock calmly decided to move his company onto a nearby spur to the southwest. Reinforced with a platoon of the 2nd 5th and some commandos, the Australians would tenaciously resist until the late afternoon, employing cool and well-directed Australian fire to break up the enemy attacks. Sherlock himself would lead a bayonet charge to repel Japanese infiltrators and restore some lost positions, allowing his men to hold on through the night, even though his ammunition was running short and the Japanese were ferociously encroaching. Motten would immediately react by sending a recently landed company of the 2nd 5th to reinforce the defenders. They would arrive during the night to help Sherlock withdraw to the Bulolo River, where they would attempt to delay the enemy advance long enough for the remaining reinforcements to land on Wau. Meanwhile, Winning's commandos were also sent from Black Cat to reinforce Sherlock, although they would end up retreating to Wau as the sounds of fighting were leading in that direction. Similarly, the bulk of the 2nd 5th would be ordered to move with haste to reinforce Wau's defences. At the Bololo, however, Sherlock would be killed as he attempted to cross the raging river. Yet his forces would nevertheless continue to resist before completing their retreat behind the river, successfully delaying the Japanese advance for an entire day and forcing Okabe to divert his forces to the flanks. As such, some Japanese units of the 2nd Battalion would get to cross the river near the Black Cat Track. The detachment headquarters would move to capture Kaisenik and its supplies, and the 1st Battalion would get lost in the dark as it advanced south towards Crystal Creek. The soldiers of the 1st Battalion would finally end up near Ballams, so the unit would have to circle back, arriving at Crystal Creek by 0700 on January 29th. Their confusion would allow the 2nd 5th to safely arrive at Wau. With the dawn of January 29th, Okabe had wasted the element of surprise that was gained through the difficult march on the Jap track. But Moten also knew that he needed to be reinforced immediately if he hoped to succeed. Luckily for him, the conclusion of the Battle of Buna-Gona allowed General Blamey to deploy most of his aircraft for the defense of Wau. Thus, the last company of the 2nd 5th Battalion and the bulk of the 2nd 7th would successfully land on Wau by early afternoon. By that time, the vanguard of the Okabe detachment was also reaching the outer defences of the airfield, although the defenders would manage to stop them at Larry's farm. Yet the Australians would have to wait for the next Japanese attack until 0400 on January 30th, as 2 companies assaulted the slaughter yards and the racecourse. In both places, the Japanese attack would be soundly defeated by the resolute defence of the 2nd 7th's men and Winning's commandos. And by the next morning, 2 25-pounder guns were also landed and immediately employed to shell the enemy, with Australian bowfighters being sent to fire on the Japanese forces as well. The recent attacks also forced Moten to request more reinforcements, so the 2nd 3rd Independent Company of Major George Worf would be flown on January 31st, with a machine gun company also arriving the following day. This left Moten confident enough to claim that the situation at Wau was now well at hand. Similarly, Okabe now knew that he was facing a large enemy force, so he decided to suspend any major assault, with his forces instead engaging the defenders in a series of skirmishes for the next few days. Looking further south, after the collapse of Japanese resistance in the Buna-Gona area, the remnants of the once proud South Seas detachment and of reinforcements that had arrived to relieve them began a difficult withdrawal towards the Lae-Salamaua area. Colonel Tsukamoto, having withdrawn his forces back on January 12th, arrived at Barambari near the mouth of the Kumusi almost 11 days later. Major Koiwai, who led the retreat of the ragtag soldiers of the central sector, also began to arrive at Barambari on January 28th. Finally, around 4,000 men, including sick and wounded, had broken out from Garua, although 850 of these would not make it back to Barambari. The rest arrived individually or in small groups, some barely able to walk, and some still remarkably fit, and then started to be ferried up to Mambare. By February 7th, the entire Buna detachment had assembled at Mambare, where landing vessels, around 20 barges brought down from Lae, were being prepared to carry them north to that town. 2 companies of the Okabe detachment also came from Lae with the barges to carry out clearing operations up the Mambare River and to establish a holding camp by the Ampolo River for units withdrawing overland, where they would actually hold off several attacks by Allied pursuit parties. On February 11th, the Japanese survivors would finally start their last journey towards the Lae-Salamaua area, although progress would be agonizingly slow because they could only move safely during the night. By late April, the South Seas detachment was finally evacuated to Rabaul, where the 18th Army finally dissolved one of the most famous detachments of the Imperial Japanese Army, reabsorbing it into the 55th Division, then fighting at Burma. Returning to Wau, action restarted on February 2nd, as Major Worf was ordered to attack Woody Island in front of the racecourse. Yet the Japanese troops were well dug in behind a steep-banked creek, and so the Australian commandos would suffer many losses and would have to withdraw. After the failure of the attacks on the previous 2 days, however, Worf prepared to launch a major assault on February 4th, as he now knew the layout of the Japanese defense positions and would ensure that support fire was directed to the right places. With artillery, mortar and machine gun fire targeting key enemy positions, the Australians charged with bayonets fixed, with such ferocity that the Japanese had to abandon their positions, withdrawing back to the Bololo River by February 6th. At the same time as the Japanese regrouped at Crystal Creek and prepared for a possible withdrawal, Motten ordered the 2nd 5th and 2nd 7th Battalions to launch a major attack against the enemy and open up a supply route with the forces trapped at Skindawai. Dug in among difficult terrain, however, the Japanese offered determined resistance, only getting pushed a few miles towards Crystal Creek. Finally, February 6th also saw the Japanese launch their first and only major air attack on Wau, which ended in favour of the Allies. The following day, the 2nd 5th continued to attack the main Japanese positions on Crystal Creek, putting much pressure on a force that was already on the brink of starvation. For the next 2 days, the Australians would continue to hammer the enemy defences with infantry assaults and artillery bombardments, gradually pushing back the invaders, although at a high cost. A major breakthrough would finally come on February 9th, as B Company 2nd 5th Battalion managed to push through towards Kaisenik, and then continued on to Skindawai. Meanwhile, many of the Japanese remnants were taking to the hills towards Wandumi, where Akabe had finally determined that his best option was to withdraw back to Mubo before his forces got annihilated. But as the Japanese commenced their final retreat, a surprise was awaiting them on the Jap track. The 2nd 6th Battalion of Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Wood had effectively cut off the track, successfully harassing the desperate enemy soldiers and inflicting several casualties on the retreating Japanese. Yet the action would end with Wood getting shot in the head and the Australians pulling back, so Akabe's men would finally be able to continue their retreat unopposed. Furthermore, to ensure the orderly withdrawal of the Akabe detachment, the Japanese command at Mubo was sending fresh men into the area to engage the Australian pursuers under Major Wharf and to push back the commandos operating around Waipali. By February 21st, however, Akabe's forces had successfully reached Mubo, signalling the end of the Battle of Wau. During the abortive action to capture Wau, the invaders had lost over 1,000 men, while the Australians suffered around 350 casualties. The actions of Captain Sherlock and his forces had been the decisive point of the battle, as the Japanese advance was delayed long enough for the Australians to rapidly reinforce their defences. This, however, was only the start of a larger and longer campaign to push back the Japanese from Mubo to Salamaua. Next week, we'll return to the CBI Theatre to cover some new developments during the months of January and February, including new operations in China and the start of the first Chindits expedition. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.